All right. I'm really excited. Today I have with me David Ben Moshe. So the reason why we're having David on today is because he's actually been up a little bit in the news, but more interestingly to me is actually his entire story. And I think there are a lot of parallels to David's life story and his current situation that a lot of us can relate to. So I was thinking of introducing you, David, but I think you might do yourself a little bit more justice. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's going on now with you, what your situation is, to kind of fill people in, and then maybe we could talk about your backstory and how you got here to begin with.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It is an honor to talk to you. And so my current situation is I just got a written promise from the government that finally on January 1st, 2023, I will be allowed to make Aliyah and given Ole status in the country, something I've been fighting for since May 9th, 2018.
But you always know someone's like really has like a serious struggle when they have like a start date. Do you know what I mean? That's like we've been doing this forever. And I was like, have you? You know, it's legit. So let's add a little bit more meat on that. So for those that don't know, David had an Orthodox conversion. He's from Baltimore, and in order to make Aliyah, which means to legally immigrate to Israel and become an Israeli citizen, you need to be Jewish or prove your Judaism. And he's been having some challenges there. We'll unpack that in a bit. And basically, the Israeli government is very good. If they're good at anything, they're very good at being reliable at being the Israeli government and being incompetent in all the things that you think they should be competent in, and all the things they think whatever. They have it all backwards. Anyway, so why don't you kind of take us back a little bit on your journey, and we'll come back to him. Congratulations. Yeah. And for those that don't know, David also had a hunger strike, which if you stay tuned, we'll find out. I also want to know what a free man does to break his hunger strike. Because most people that are on a hunger strike, often they're in prison. And so what do you break it on? Prison food. So I want to know what you broke your hunger strike on. That's probably far more interesting than when I break like my Yom Kippur fast. You know, it's usually like, it three beers. It's like 3 beers of cash. But I want to hear a little bit about that. But so maybe you can kind of take us a little bit about kind of where you're from, Baltimore, how you grew up and raised, how you're introduced to Judaism, kind of a little bit of that, and then we'll kind of bring you over how you came to Israel and the situation you're in now.
And that really is a big part of the story. So I was raised actually outside of Frederick, Maryland. For those people who know Maryland, it's a small enough city that even people from Maryland don't know where it is, to 2 fundamentalist Christian parents. Mm-hmm. And so I was raised Christian. Christianity just kind of never spoke to me. But like, you know, growing up, you kind of do what your parents want you to do for a certain point, and then suddenly you stop doing it, which can sometimes cause some tension in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And eventually went off to college, kind of had a complete break with talking to my parents, and had an absolutely terrible college experience.
Wait, why did you break with your parents? You mean you stopped speaking with your parents altogether once you started taking college?
Yeah, we had a few years.
You were like, was it low? I was wondering if it's close to home. Okay, I was wondering if it was close. Okay. And so what happened? I mean, I feel like you know, one of the, I think probably you're a father now, so am I. Probably the greatest thing is imagining not being able to speak to your kids or having a relation with your kids that you're no longer speaking, you know. And selfishly, as children, as we've all been, we like, you know, we think we have good reasons, but sometimes we think that maybe it's not. You know, from the
I definitely appreciate the other side much more now that like I've got even with like young children, like I call my daughter, I'm like, give me a hug, and she's like busy playing with her toys. It's like, I mean,
yeah, this is the way of being a man. You're invisible. Starting. All right. So, do you mind? So, what happened with your? How did you and your parents stop talking? What happened there?
So my parents really wanted us to find a way to be successful. And they had this kind of idea that there were 2 things that are the most important things in life. And if you can do well at those, everything else will work out. And those 2 things were Christianity and education. And like I said earlier, Christianity kind of didn't really set completely right with me. Like I did the things as growing up, didn't want that lifestyle. And educationally, I was a terrible student. And so since like their two big core values were two things I wasn't into or good at, it kind of caused this constant tension that permeated through all of our relationship until eventually just the fights got so bad, like I broke off contact.
Wow. Did you, how long were you not speaking to them for? Was it like you weren't coming home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and like nothing? Like they expected, like,
Yeah.
that must have been
It
very
was
tough for them.
off and on for like months at a time. Probably the longest period was like a year or two, like from like prison to like outside of prison.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. And then when did you rekindle? How did you rekindle that relationship with your parents? Is it usually does the parent come to the kid, or usually, or did you go to your parents?
So I was doing my yoga teacher certification training.
Oh, that's how all the answers start.
And we had a big section about relationships and really learning how to look inside about like what you are doing to make relationships negative instead of focusing on what the other person's doing. And then through that process, I reached out to them, we rebuilt the relationship, and we now still talk, and they are very sad they can't come visit because the skies are closed to non-Israeli citizens.
I know. We'll get to the bitching later. How old were you at this point, by the way, when you were doing yoga and reached back out to your parent, that you rekindled your relationship with your parents?
24, 25.
Got it. Awesome. And how did you go into yoga?
So I started doing yoga in prison because I was having terrible lower back pain and sciatica, and doing that just kind of fixed it completely so I could keep doing all the things I wanted to do physically. And then so after I got released, I was working as a personal trainer, and my kind of continuing education plan as a fitness coach was every year I would do 2 professional certifications. So eventually I wanted to do a yoga certification. Did that. Actually, after that, I became a yoga teacher for a long time and still teach anatomy and physiology sections for yoga teacher training for a company called Therefore I Learn, based in Maryland.
Oh, very cool. So so you went straight to, so let's go back. How did you end up in prison? What happened there?
So after I dropped out of college, I needed a way to support myself.
Why did you drop out?
One thing,
I don't you mind me asking. Like, what did you study? What did you study?
So I initially studied computer science, but I've got a number of learning disabilities, dyslexic, ADD, and the school type learning, just like I can't sit in a lecture and learn anything. It is a complete waste of my time, and like the bulk of the first like 2 years of an undergraduate degree is like lecture hall classes with a teacher talking at you.
It's such garbage, really.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And I have an MBA and I have top class and everything, and it's just, especially now. Well, how long ago was that? How old are you?
So that was like 1920.
1920? I mean,
no, I was like 19 or 20 years old.
Oh, I think you meant the year 1920. Like, wait, how old are you?
Yeah.
I was like, I thought I was good at math for a minute. I was like, okay. You said you were dyslexic. Okay, cool, got it. And so you dropped out and you need to find a way to support yourself, and
Yeah. And one of the things I realized was that kind of being the Black guy on campus meant that people would just ask to buy drugs from me. And if you walk down city streets and you're Black, people will just offer to sell you drugs. And that is a 1 + 1 = 2, very easy situation to start supporting yourself financially.
Got it. And so what, you got arrested for dealing?
Yeah. So I was eventually arrested for unlicensed dealing of firearms and distribution of oxycodone.
I wonder if any of that made its way up north. I might have. Philly, oxycontin. Yeah. I'll tell you a story later. Actually, I'll say it now. When I started to become religious, one of the hard things was not smoking weed on Shabbat. I was a big pothead then. So it was perks and oxys with beers on Friday night. And I was hanging out with my friends that were still blazing. So, that was how I did it.
I mean, it's definitely like one of the I talk a lot about how one of the things that is harming the Black community so much is the war on drugs. Like, there is a lot of like drugs are dangerous and bad, but there's this like idea that a lot of people have that like, oh, like drugs cause violence. And it's like that's not true. Yeah, anyone
video
who
games
has
also,
been to college,
video games don't cause violence. Like violent video games don't lead to violence at all. In fact, it's a healthy outlet for those that might be, if anything.
Yeah, and anyone who has been to college in the United States should know that you can have large amounts of people doing lots of drugs and almost no violence if you have other things. So you can't point to that as the one cause, and cracking down on that and incarcerating everyone involved on that as hard as possible is the solution. Because like you just mentioned, like many successful professionals, when they're younger in their college, experiment with them and somehow manage to turn out fine. So we need to figure out what's working for. Yeah, that's a good one.
I loved it because he came right out and he was like, yeah, I did blow. And it was like, and I think that kind of just not to, I mean, it was like for two people, it was for those who say that like, just because you're experimenting, doesn't mean you can't like turn things around, have a life or whatever. And things are temporary. And then I think it's also more important for society to know that who and what you were when you were 20 isn't who and what you are when you're 40, or who you were a year ago isn't who you are today.
And I think that's a huge part of my story is that tshuva, changing and becoming a better person is possible for all of us, no matter kind of where you are now. And next year, 5 years, 10 years, you can be a completely different, unrecognizable person and doing tons of good in the world if you start working towards that.
So how does one realize that though? So I wonder, I'll ask you outright, how much did your Christian upbringing help you in a sense, kind of pursue, let's say, some form of tshuva or a form of truth or something like that? And do you feel those that didn't have the upbringing that you did, a religious upbringing, whatever that is, they might not even have a compass to kind of help them when they get stuck, so to speak?
Well, for me, it was helpful in finding Judaism because I learned something that kind of contradicted the way that I had been brought up and traditionally thought about religion. And that was kind of the way that Judaism happened to me was I'm in the library and there's a lockdown on the compound. So lockdown, no one could move, you're stuck where you are, you don't know how long you're gonna be there. And I'm walking around, I'm like stir crazy, so is everyone else. And there's like one guy who's sitting there studying quietly. Hours pass. I eventually, ask him like what he's like reading because I can't recognize any of the letters on the page. He tells me it's the Torah, it's the Jewish Bible. And then I saw all these little boxes at the bottom of the page. And I asked him like, what's up with those? And he explained to me the idea of Parshanut. And that this is like traditionally like the Orthodox way of studying the Bible is to study a lot of different people's conflicting interpretations of what the verses mean throughout the ages. And the idea that you would have a religion that valued that disagreement and that discussion and wanted to hold on to it kind of blew my mind as far as what it means to like be religious and to believe something is the word of God. And that kind of started me researching more about Judaism, and I really connected to it and decided that this is what is for me.
That's awesome. I think you basically summed up Judaism as a bunch of conflicting opinions. Like two Jews, three opinions. Well, amazing. Are you still in touch with that man?
No.
Have you ever been or anything? Does he know that you've inspired, like that he's changed a life, just by sitting there?
Yeah.
Like he's like been a divine gift?
I don't think so. And because I still interacted with him a little bit on the inside, but kind of there are certain rules about how you interact with people and the relationships you maintain and who you hang out with on the inside that you want to not break the social norms because there can be serious consequences to that in prison.
Basically, in short, you're saying that racial or religious, there are lines that you don't cross, so you don't speak to people outside of them. Is that what you're saying?
Um,
You're just being very innuendo.
Yeah.
So maybe if you want to be a little more blunt.
yeah. So basically, when there are people who it's unsure what they're in for and they don't fit any of the molds of what you'd expect someone to be incarcerated for, there is an assumption that they could be a child molester. And if you hang out too much with them, there are repercussions to your reputation, which can cause you serious problems if you don't do it the right way and in the right amounts.
Got it. Understood. No. And so how long were you in prison for?
So I was sentenced to 30 months. I ended up actually only being fully incarcerated for about 21 because I got the 6 months of halfway house and I was released early for good behavior.
Awesome. Very cool. What's it like to be in prison? Like for so long? I mean, is there like day in, day out? I mean, it's outside of the library and let's say the gym. Are there other opportunities for any kind of growth, physical, mental, spiritual, or otherwise?
Almost none. Here is the best way I like to describe prison. Generally, people think of prison as the scary, dangerous place where you're always on edge and terrible, violent things are always happening. In reality, it's mostly boring. Like
Something to do.
you have, yeah. Like think about being locked down in your house over COVID and only being able to leave to go to the grocery store or to the pharmacy, but having your laptop, your cell phone, Netflix, Zoom, all those things, and contrast that with being in a cell with a few books and the other person in the cell and being let out occasionally. And also during like transport and stuff, there's times where, for instance, when you arrive on a compound, the first thing they do is they put you in what they call the SHU, the secure housing unit, to make sure you're not at risk. So basically, people generally know this as solitary confinement, but in a lot of facilities in the United States, they're so overcrowded that they've actually taken the solitary confinement cells and stuck bunk beds or triple beds in them to fit more people. So like you arrive on the compound and to make sure you're not at risk, they put you in a solitary confinement cell built for one person that has 3 bunk beds and you have 3 guys in this one cell and you're supposed to be let out an hour a day for exercise, but you're not usually, and you're there for 3 days. Like that is a tough experience.
And that's harder than after you're actually able to then communicate with the rest of the.
Yeah, and once you're like on the pound, you can go to the library, you can go to the rec yard, you can go to the chapel. You're actually required by law to work. Another interesting thing a lot of people don't realize is that the amendment that bans slavery explicitly says that with the exception of if you're convicted of a crime. So like as a federal inmate, you are required by law to work. There's way more people than there are jobs. So most of them are like, oh, like stand in the kitchen with a hairnet on for, 4 hours a day and get paid, 19 cents an hour.
I'm sorry to make the comparison, but it reminds me of about like 25% of the people in the Israeli army, jobnicks, just like sitting around doing nothing. They get paid like was it like $100 for a month? They're like in the army, but they're not doing anything useful, and they're forced to stand there. Yeah. That's actually.
And then there are like vocational programs, but they're mostly a way for the prison to save expenses. For example, I did the carpentry program where I was incarcerated. And what that looked like was there was a bunch of textbooks, you could like read and like do quizzes on, and they had the inmates who were carpenters on the outside, and the teacher basically had those inmates doing projects for the facility for free while ignoring all of us students who didn't learn anything.
That's screwed up. It's backwards. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
they used to say that it was, I'm speaking from an American perspective, and I know you are too, just for those who are listening, that it was a place like that you were able to, it was like a rehabilitation center, ideally, right? Is this, that, you know, it's the
yeah.
funny thing because the Torah doesn't really talk about prison. It's not. It's just like, that's just like, it's like either the death penalty or nothing, right? Or be free.
Yeah, and there's really, I think, one of the biggest problems that we're not talking about in America when it comes to criminal justice reform is that the system is 100% punitive and almost 0% rehabilitative.
Correct.
And the problem with that model is you get, our 70% recidivism rate. You have people who are released and they have nothing to do, no plan, and also it's virtually impossible to find a job because you always have to inform the employers about the criminal record. If you have someone incarcerated for 10 years and they leave without a job waiting for them in some type of education and a plan for success, like that's on you. Like you had 10 years to help him figure out how he was going to be successful and earn a living and support himself and his family and give him the skills and find a place for him to work. But there is none of that at all. It's kind of lock the door, throw away the key, let him out when he's ready, and, hope that by staring at the wall for all that time, he has figured out a way to be successful. And yes, I was someone who managed to do that, but I'm certainly not the normative case. But if we could create a society where stories like mine were the norm, I think we'd all be happier and we'd definitely all be safer.
Yeah, it would definitely be safer. I think this is a uniquely American problem because I think you kind of see the same responses when it comes to homelessness and drug addiction. Is that
Yes.
kind of it's the neglect? Don't be near me. Don't see with me. Don't associate with you. You've rehabilitated. I don't want to hire you. You only know one way of living. As let's say being an addict or just living on the street, and then trying. How do you get that person like to fold it back into society? And there aren't really ways to do that. They've been totally neglected. And I feel that people just kind of try to mind their own business and keep far away from anything that they see as might potentially negative impact them or the people around them. As opposed to drawing people near. Have you been involved at all with Israeli criminal with the Israeli prisons and things? Is any different, or what's it like here? I have no idea. I'm more familiar with America than Israeli, to be honest.
Yeah. The one thing I've done is I went to speak for a program called Radio Focus, which is a radio station inside prison that is got the mission of teaching the inmates how to learn, skills they can use on the outside as far as audio production, media, cool. So they can find work on the outside. So they brought me into their studio, which was one of the most beautiful studios I've ever been interviewed in. It's like you're walking through prison, it's gray, there's bars, there's barbed wires, and you're in the middle of this prison, they open the door, and it's like walking in to like a professional recording studio.
It's like a portal, right?
Yeah. And you have like a bunch of guys sitting around on computers with like their little mixing things on. They've got Arabs and Jews together, and they're making content to help the prisoners grow and learn and be successful on the outside. That's like their mission.
Amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I always wondered. I always feel like if you ever watch any of these videos of like comedians or artists that go and play at prisons, if you ever watch those movies, and I'm sure you don't have to watch it, but and you've noticed like that everyone has a human element. Everyone's very human, right? And we all have emotions and all of that, and often that's forgotten. We neglect all of the good of an individual, and we only associate with that label of criminal, addict, homeless, whatever, you know what I mean? And then we write off an entire individual.
And we did that in our personal lives for their entire lives, as if like you're the person who's never made mistakes, and like as if we don't all know that change is possible. We really need to just help people. If we can help everyone reach their maximum potential, I think that is the path to creating the world that we want to live in.
Agreed. Do you think religion should play a bigger role in rehabilitation in prisons?
I think it has the potential to. I don't want to say that it should, because while I'm religious myself, am very against religious coercion.
Mhm.
I do think that we can't write off the amount of wisdom that is baked into our religious traditions, which is easy to not realize if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about why religions require people to do certain things. And I think any religion that's been around for, thousands of years, like there's a reason it's lasted, and they've had a lot of great thinkers think about how and why things should be done. And it might not be obvious why, but following some of those rules, even though they seem arbitrary, very often set you up for life success. I
Oh
think
man,
the best
the
example of
wisdom.
this, is Judaism. If you look at the amount of the population of Earth that is Jewish, and then look at the influence that Jews have had on so many aspects of the world, it's very clear to me, at least, that culturally something has happened that sets you up to be able to do these things and change the world and make these advancements and breakthroughs and have certain types of academic success.
Mhm.
And I think that anytime you see outsized influence like that, you have to say that. Like you can say the same thing for Black culture in America when it comes to sports. Like it's not just like, oh, Black people are genetically better at sports and that's why they dominate the NBA and the NFL. Like, no, there is
Mhm.
a cultural reason and action and way things are thought of that leads to outside success. And I think that anyone who wants to learn how to have certain types of success can do that by looking at the cultures that are producing these wonders.
Yeah. I mean, if you grow up in America, you know them. I grew up in Philly, so like me and my neighbor, who's a Russian guy, a Russian kid who's my age, and we would play video games. And there were black people on our block, and they were playing sports. So we were in sports playing video games. So there's a difference. We play like sometimes, but we were really addicted to like Mario Kart and GoldenEye and I don't remember, like Nintendo back in the day. So yeah, it definitely is there, and there is something about kind of the culture that's very important there. So okay. So you were let out. What happened so what does a man do once he's let out of prison? What's the first thing you did?
So I was sent to the halfway house. Now, we were saying about the halfway house. The halfway house is halfway in, not halfway out. So the first thing that happens is you get there, and so they give you a bus ticket, and you're allowed to self-transport by yourself there.
Is that where most people make the mistake? Sounds like, is that hard?
No, most people don't make the mistake. Usually once they're inside the halfway house, they make the mistake.
Okay.
And a lot of that is the rules. So like after transporting myself for hours to the halfway house, I get there and the first thing they do is lock you down for a week because you're a flight risk. As if my plan was to flee, I would have just not showed up in the first place.
Right,
now
at the
that I'm
airport.
here.
That's what I was asking.
And checked in. Like now you're afraid I'm gonna run away.
God, they have no logic.
And and the first place I went once my 7-day lockdown was over there was to shul, to a place called B'nai Israel in Baltimore, Maryland, which became a spiritual home for me. I did my Orthodox conversion there. And every time I go back to the States, I go back for Shabbat. I'm still very close with the rabbi who converted me, who's still the rabbi there. I was talking to him.
What's his name?
A few days ago, Rabbi Eitan Mintz.
Okay. Just thought I'd give a shout out.
And so that was my first trip out, and I found just a welcoming and accepting modern Orthodox community that really just welcomed me.
Awesome. I also went to B'nai Israel in Philly. B'nai Israel Synagogue in Philly. That was the show
It's a
I
good
went to.
name.
It's a good name. Yeah. My last name's Israel.
Yeah.
So not gonna say there. Amazing. Awesome. So you went. So you're in. How long were you said you were in the halfway house? No, you told me earlier. I forgot. How many months?
6 months.
6 months. And so you said you're more half in than half out, right? So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So you're in the halfway house. The halfway house I was in was a converted motel. And basically you're there 24/7, except you can put in a request to leave, and the request may or may not be approved to allow you to leave. So like you can leave with permission for certain things your counselor approves. The food is actually worse than in prison.
I don't know why it's funny.
Yeah. And eventually, like I found out that kind of what happens there is that the workers are stealing the food out of the back and taking it home because what's going to happen? Like we're going to complain. No one's going to listen to us. Like, oh, the inmates are saying they're being underfed. No, look, here's what the menu looks like. They're definitely getting
we
enough
see
food.
how much money we bought in food and came into the place. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and it's gone. They must have eaten it. Yeah. And yeah, so you're just kind of sitting around waiting and you're like trying to find a job, but they've set up so many barriers. For example, it's illegal to have a cell phone. So like for an employer to call you back, you have to give them what you're supposed to do is give them either the number to your counselor, who's there's some of them were good and some of them were terrible, or give them the number to one of the payphones in the halfway house where they would call, someone would answer and probably not answer the most polite way and then go try to find you if you're there so you can get a call back. So it's like you can't even like get a call back on an interview for a job application submitted. Now, I found creative ways to get around a lot of these barriers. For example, that particular one where I did was set up a Google Voice number linked to my email address and have them call that. So since I didn't have a computer or a cell phone, I couldn't answer. But then when I got to an employment center, I could check my email and then listen to the voice message and then call them back instead of having to go through that. And that's just part of being lucky enough to being like tech savvy to find ways around it, but not everyone is lucky enough to have that advantage who's in there. In fact, most people aren't.
Amazing, interesting. Well, you've been exposed to so much incompetence. It's so fascinating to me. You could probably solve so much just with your experience and your just like the common sense and so much incompetence that you've been exposed to.
I've had to do a lot of out of the box thinking to get to where I am today.
No, but that's true too.
Yeah.
But think about people that make all these dumb rules, whether it's related to legal prison, the halfway house, the food, the conversion, and these people are so disconnected.
Another great one was in the halfway house. If you had a car, you're allowed to bring it, but bicycles were banned. And they're supposed to have bus tokens for us to get everywhere, but they were stealing those too, so we could rarely get those. So kind of, I had to run everywhere until eventually I figured out a way to get a bicycle. And so the way I did that, this is actually a friend of mine thought of this. Around the corner, there was a 24-hour U-Haul with storage units. So like we put like a pass or something else, went in there, opened storage units, and then went and got a bicycle and parked it in there. So then I'd leave, check out, walk around the corner, down a couple blocks, go into my 24-hour storage unit, take out my bike to where I was going, bike back, park it in there, and then I was on being able to like save that time, especially when your passes are for a limited amount of time, made a huge difference in my ability to like be gainfully employed.
That's amazing. What skills were available to you and others in order to be able to gain employment once you leave the halfway house?
So one of the things we're allowed to put passes in for was going to an employment center where we could, get on I had an employment center on place, but the computers were really slow. Only like one or two of them worked. It was just like a complete disaster. But they didn't really do a lot to help us find jobs. It's kind of like you're on your own, but you're required to find a job. And if you don't find one, you might get sent back to prison.
Got it.
I've yeah, and my story of how I found a job was every hour of every day I could be applying. Had a lot of
Amazing.
interviews. Of course, once the criminal record comes up, that's usually the end of the interview, and you don't get a call back. But I eventually found
When does it come
a
up?
gym.
Like when they do a background check, or they ask you, or are you legally obligated to tell them, or I'm just curious how that
So
were to come up.
at the time, all employment applications had the box, like check the box if a criminal record explained
Oh,
why.
right. I
So I
remember
would,
this. Right.
check the box and say, we'll explain an interview. And so, of course, one of the early questions is, I see you mark the box, can you explain? And then as soon as they hear the word, drugs, like interviews over.
Especially then, I think there's much greater tolerance now than there was then.
Yeah.
Got it. Understood. And then so
A lot of people have done a lot to make that much better than when I was released.
Say it again. People are better about it now.
A lot of people have done a lot of things to make, like, a lot of ban the box initiatives have caught on around the United States to where that's not as prevalent. That just like, oh, every single job application, they can just easily throw out all the criminals, or it's the first question when you walk in through the door, which makes it very tough to compete and get a job in anything except fast food. And I was actually very blessed that I was unemployable in fast food. And the reason for that was I was already at a point where I refused to work on Shabbat. And if you start in fast food, they want you to start nights and weekends, tell them you won't work Friday night to Saturday. And that's the end of the application, which gave me the time to find a decent job.
Nice. I remember I used to wait tables in Philly, and I was working like Olive Garden and Applebee's, and I was like, yeah, I don't work on Shabbat. Like, you don't work weekends. It wasn't even them. They didn't. The owners didn't care. The other waiters thought I was nuts because the tips, bigger tips, more tables, you're making more money on the weekend. They're like, all right, more weekend for us. But they're like, why are you doing this? And I was like, but I was also there in the back studying textbooks and also trying to study and get things up. So let's talk about your anything else about your experience in prison, the halfway house, or anything you feel that we can learn from you or grow from. And if not, then I have one last question. Then let's take it over to your.
Another thing that I sat down and did was, at one point I developed a life planning course that I called Life by Design, where I kind of thought about the end of my life, what I wanted to be, what type of things to achieve, and then work backwards what type of things I should be achieving, and use that to make a daily schedule of okay, I need to spend these hours exercising, these hours, reading books, these hours, working on this plan, and in different areas of my life, as far as my professional development, the community I wanted around me, rest and relaxation. And that planning process helped me really stay on track and be successful. So kind of taking some time to set goals and figure out where you want to go, and working backwards to the day to figure out how you should best be spending your time, so that you don't just lose your hours, hanging out with friends, watching Netflix. You know where you're going, and your actions will take you there 1 hour at a time.
So that's probably the greatest value I think anyone's ever said. So you basically what you did is you reverse engineered the life that you want. You broke it down into small processes and steps, and then you set very many goals and just things to do that are very usable and bite-sizable. When you add it all up.
And I still have that entire, it's a notebook, it's like a binder this thick, that's just full of papers that I filled out in there one by one, and that was an extremely useful process.
When's the last time you looked at that? You opened that up?
6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so a lot of my goals and plans have changed drastically since then.
I hope so.
Yeah. I also tell people that I believe it is a Eisenhower quote, which is one of my favorite quotes to tell people. And it's that no battle was ever won according to plan,
yes,
but no battle was ever won without a plan.
That's very good.
Right. Yeah, it's exactly a process of planning, even though things don't work out as you planned, is so invaluable. And I think that's something that especially a lot of young people need to hear when it comes to developing their lives. Like when I like talk to like younger people, I always tell them that a lot of people will tell you that you need to find yourself. I think it's a more valuable use of your time to create yourself.
I agree with you, by the way. And like one of the things that I hate that people say is like follow your passion and things like that. I feel like they're not able, that's not helping you really create yourself. Well, so if you were to give, let's say, advice to a young man or a young woman who doesn't know what direction they want to go in their life professionally or whatnot, they feel a little lost. They see some of their friends succeeding, some of their friends traveling, some of their friends became total losers. What would you recommend to that individual that is interested in some wisdom and some learning, some growth, and to live a good life, but they may not have the role models, the know-how, or the ways to get there?
One, read. I don't care what you read, just read. That will help you think of new ideas and expose you to new ways of thinking about life where you could go that will help you figure it out. Next, think about the thing that you really enjoy doing. Like, even if it sounds like stupid. So I'll use myself for example. When I was in high school, I really loved reading about exercise and learning different like exercise training techniques and like that area. And I read a lot about it and I liked working out. And then, but I didn't go study it in college because everyone around me told me that there's no career and no way to make money by like knowing about exercise. It is like it's a nice hobby, but you can't ever turn it into a career. But then, for the last 10 years, I mostly worked full-time professionally as a personal trainer, teaching people how to exercise and turned it into a pretty good career. But it's just, I never knew that that was an option. Like the thing that you enjoy doing, there is almost definitely a way that that can be turned into a career. You just have to figure out what it is. Even if it's just teaching it, maybe it's about developing it. Like if you love playing video games and you learn how to code, people who code video games have great careers.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So like whatever that thing that you love doing, like figure out what's associated with that you can do that brings value to others. If you can do what you love and bring value to others, you'll probably have pretty happy days at work. And if you mostly have happy days at work, you'll mostly like your job. And that's not to say that there won't be things you hate. Everyone's got parts of their jobs that they hate and can't be around. For example, I've mostly been self-employed, and that means I've got to do my own taxes, which is terrible, and I hate it. But I would choose that over having a boss who tells me, sit and work during these hours. I want to have that freedom and flexibility to do what I want to when I want to. And that's kind of the trade-off that I made. So do what you love, figure out the trade-offs you have to make it happen, and just read.
Right. Yeah. But it's so true about reading. It's amazing because I don't listen to my coach sent me an audiobook, a short one to listen to. And I was like, you may not believe this. Like I read a lot, but I haven't listened to one audiobook ever. It was the first one I ever listened to. I'll listen to podcasts, but books I always, because I read a lot on Shabbat. That's when I do most of my reading.
Yeah.
And so naturally I'm at print, and we grew up reading before there was the internet or audiobooks was even a thing, really. Well, that's not true there because that's where it was actually really popular. And so I always found that actually reading really makes you stop and think. And I read slow, not that I'm like a slow reader, but I read slowly, if you know what I mean, because there's so much like wisdom and depth. And if you can think about how you can incorporate what you're actually learning, it's really valuable. It's really amazing.
And as someone who, I do a ton of audiobooks. I've got an Audible subscription. I've had it for over a decade. I listen to tons of audiobooks, but I think it's important to recognize that not everything is an audio format. And if you can read and you are passionate about something, in 2022, you can learn how to do anything you want. With your internet connection, the ability to read, and just a fire to learn, you can learn how to do. People build nuclear reactors off of like teenagers.
It's unreal.
Off of researching on the internet. Like,
it's unreal.
all the information you could ever want is out there.
I know,
but
which is
you
why
need to be able to read
scale.
it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And so, yeah, I graduated with straight A's from college in the end, and I'm currently pursuing a master's, and I will say college is a scam.
Wait, what are you studying now?
Journalism
Uh-huh.
at NYU.
So why not just like go ahead and just do it on your own? You can't like why don't you just be a journalist, right? I'm interviewing you. Am I not a journalist?
Yeah. Mentors and networking.
Okay, got it. I think
like the one thing you can get in a college environment is sometimes professors, or like there are certainly professors who are just academics and don't know anything about the real world. And you get, especially in undergrad, you get a lot of them, but there are also professors who have great real world experience and started being professors because there's some huge advantages to it as a career, and use it to supplement their work outside of it, and the ability to network and learn from them and have their full undivided attention in a format where their goal is to teach you can be extremely advantageous if you're willing to take advantage of it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but it's still a scam, of course. Yeah, I didn't find a lot of networking opportunities from my school and all of that, and the teachers. Maybe it's probably me. It's probably I didn't pursue it. But
Yeah.
but I don't know. So I guess I'll never know. I went to Temple in Philly, so
Okay.
yeah. Very cool. Awesome. So so how did you? So you got in. So your first time you were exposed to Judaism, you said was in prison. You saw a dude reading when there was a lockdown, and so he was reading and studying Torah. And then since then, so you said when you were in the how long ago was that before you were let out into the halfway house? How much time has progressed? How much time passed from that to that?
Probably about a year, 9 months, a year, something like that.
And were you doing any studying until then, or like during those 9 months or a year? Like what?
Yeah, everything I get my hands on.
Got it. And so what was that in prison? Was it which they had like the Torah in English and you started reading it?
Yeah, I mean, you can get the whole Tanakh. That is the easiest book ever to find.
Right.
And in the library, I found some books that like explored like some Jewish concepts, and like everything I read like really spoke to me. And interesting, like some of those books appeared on my conversion reading list as well. That's like in the library. They're just, I believe, the 9 Questions About Judaism by Telushkin and Prager.
Dennis Prager. Yeah, loved it. You like Dennis Prager?
Yeah, yeah.
He's probably one of the wisest people that lived in the last like 50 years. I mean, is just
so
packed with wisdom.
Yeah. One of the things I was listening to during my hunger strike was his commentary on Shemot.
Oh, Prager's? Yeah, his new one, his new commentary. He's writing it the Rational Bible.
Yeah.
I can't wait till he comes out with those 5. I'm so excited for them.
Yeah,
I think he did Bereshit and Shemot. I'm sure
he did Shemot first,
and now he's doing Bereshit, and then he's gonna do Vayikra.
Bereshit's out. I don't know about the other 2, but like and like I want to get that physical one day. But like again, I do a lot of audiobooks just because I definitely don't have as much time as I used to sit and read, and like I gotta like do dishes and clean the house, and these are things I can't avoid, and they're great for audiobooks.
Right. I know what you mean. Yeah, right. So it's like washing dishes, and I'm listening like a podcast, and my daughter's trying to talk to me, and I'm like, wait, he's listening. I was like, I don't think this is how you're supposed to do this. And it being counterproductive another way. Yeah, Prager's great. So you're reading, basically the Tanakh, Prager, whatever, anything you can get your hands on in prison that was related. And then so you got in your halfway house, then did you go out of your way to expose yourself to more Torah and Judaism? And what was your experience with Torah before you got
first trip out? My first trip out of the halfway house was to B'nai Israel, and I told the rabbi on that day I want to do a conversion. And he looks at me and says,
wait, slow down.
Okay.
Wait. Your first day, your first day that you were out loud after the halfway house, or you left in the middle?
No, so inside the halfway house after my 7-day lockdown.
Got
My
it. Then
first trip outside was to shul, and
How
I
did you
talked
find
to the
the shul?
rabbi.
You just like you went to the white yellow pages, and you just looked like synagogue.
Yeah,
You're-
yeah,
or-
synagogue.
Right, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right, but you had
synagogue.
no
Yeah,
connection. You didn't know anyone there, or
no,
no, you never heard of
no,
the place. It could have been a
no.
Reformed temple. Would have been no. You would have ended up there. You're saying, right?
Yeah, zero connection. Synagogue near me, and that's where I ended up.
Lovely, beautiful search. As someone who does Google advertising and Google SEO, I love it. Beautiful. Okay, so you just showed up and you're like, and he was like, "Who the fuck are you?"
Yeah. So actually, he was like, "I can't help you."
Right. So are you
Yeah.
familiar with that, or did you know about the conversion process, or
No,
before you asked him, you had no idea?
no. And so,
Just gonna be
but
fun.
then he said he had a good reason. So he said, "I can't help you because in it was either 3 or 6 months I'm making Aliyah. You can't get this done in less than a year. You need to have the same rabbi with you through the entire process. So it wouldn't be fair for me to start with you. But if you keep coming regularly, when a new rabbi comes, I'll make an introduction and put in a good word for you." And he did. And then that new rabbi came, and that's the rabbi who I converted with.
Wait, when you say you keep coming, what does that mean? You came like once a week to a shiur, to class? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What do you
Yeah, come to Shabbat service on Shabbos.
mean? That was it.
Yeah,
And
like,
then
yep.
amazing.
And I came,
Mhm.
learned, got to know people in the community, got invited around, was fully welcomed. Everyone was just supportive.
Did you expect so much support?
No.
No. Did you have any expectations one way or any expectations at all? Or you're just like, I have no idea where this goes. Like, got it. This is right. Make it work kind of thing. Or what was your?
Yeah, it was more
what were
like I know that I was confident that this was the right choice for me. Like, show up and make it work was the attitude, and I showed up and it worked out.
That goes for so many things in life. How much of your wisdom do you think what had to do with like your nature and nurture growing up? Like how much maybe it came from your parents, your Christian kind of upbringing, and how much of it do you think you kind of have this kind of like the spark? Because as a father of two daughters that are so different, right?
Yeah.
I wonder how much of an impact I'm having. Like maybe I'm trying too hard. How much of nature?
It is, yeah. It is. I'm wary to put percentages on it, but I think both are really, really important.
That was a lazy
Like,
answer. Come on, give me a percent. Which one more than the other? More nature, more
Yeah.
nurture.
I don't even know how.
You don't know? All right.
think, yeah, I think it has to depend on the specific task, because so let me give you an example.
Mhm.
When I think about so like now, like I'm a freelance writer. I spend a lot of my time writing. I'm working on a memoir. I've been published in numerous like major publications in both the Jewish and non-Jewish world. And like genetically, writing is really difficult for me from like a nature standpoint. But I think this idea that my parents tried to beat into me of that you need to work much harder at school. If you're not doing it well, the problem is you're lazy and need to work harder, which I hated. And for most of my life, turned me into like just give up. It's too much work. But then at some point, I switched over to being a hard worker. An attitude of like, oh, I just need to learn more and work harder has allowed me to become like a pretty good writer, even though I think there's nothing about it in my nature.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because like me too, because I also do a lot of writing and reading, and I'm a math guy. My strength are numbers. I failed
Yeah.
English in 8th grade, and like I never vibed with it. But you didn't. I always thought it was overrated. Turns out math is overrated. I mean, now, because I remember, you probably heard this too growing up. It was like in middle school, it's like, you're not always going to have a calculator on you, because who's carrying a freaking TI-80 calculator
Calculator, yeah, in their pocket. And now it's like,
you're going to have to
right in my pocket.
You're holding more than what they just sent people to the moon. Like, there's more technology in here than NASA had.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy.
That goes to one of my major critiques of the American school system is when I see it, like having been through it and like zoomed out, I think it's kind of built to discover the most talented people in certain important domains and make sure we don't miss them. Like if we put every kid in the country through geometry, we're not going to miss a math genius, and so we'll get good engineers. But like, how useful is the amount of geometry you learn compared to something like learning how to balance a checkbook, which doesn't have a class, or file your taxes?
I will say, okay, listen, so I studied finance as an undergrad, right, at Temple, and actually this came up in conversation with my mom recently, like 2 weeks ago, because I was telling her how like school's overrated, but she's like stereotypical like American Jewish mom. So like my little brother dropped out. He also went to Temple. It wasn't right for him. He didn't have the brain for it. He had a little bit of learning disability growing up, but now he's a successful caterer and chef in Philly. So he's doing good.
Which is great.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. I was like, really? It's just funny because like you, I would, and I think like everyone probably growing up our age, I don't know how old you are, but that I'm 36, but like, you
34, so very close.
Yeah. So like the same age. So like you grow up and it was like, everything was like school. So school was the only pathway to success. And in a pre-internet world, which is hard to remember, it's even hard to remember pre-COVID 2 years ago, but in a pre-internet world, there's a lot of truth to that. It wasn't that far off, like really, like, there's no way to network. You couldn't advertise and get in front of anyone you wanted and email any person or swipe left and DM them on Twitter or anything like that. That didn't exist. So it really was school, and then those institutions, which now I think are evil and should be destroyed, whether that have been the gatekeepers. You had to play by their rules. But now that's no longer the case, which I think kind of you demonstrated, I've demonstrated, my brother's demonstrated, and a lot of people have, that you actually don't need school, you don't need math, you don't need English as much. You just need a basic level of comprehension.
And I'll also say that another thing is trade schools and vocational workers are so underrated, and we don't give those jobs the honor that they deserve.
That is correct.
I think a lot of things in America would be a lot better if like you respected your plumber, and if you were like, oh, my kid grows up to be a plumber, like that's an important job, he's doing good work, he'll make good money. And a lot of these like liberal arts skills that we're so focused on in college aren't so relevant. But like when you
not even relevant, they're obsolete. But dude, you're telling me, like I was saying, so I'm a big marketer on LinkedIn, right? That's my platform. And I was talking to my team last week, and I was like, what's LinkedIn missing is blue collar workers. Is we have all of these people that think that they're better than everyone else in society. Unfortunately, I hate these people, except my clients. Love you guys. But no, but it's just, what I mean? But like that kind of pretentious, kind of like better than everyone else. And I was like, I think we take for granted the fact that right now that we have that are, I got water running and the lights are on and all of that. And that's because the blue collar professionals, people are going into sewers and doing everything. And we totally take these people for granted. These are jobs that have significant amount of meaning. And they
deserve respect and honor.
Yeah. And
like it's a great
and even those that don't get respect, like they derive a lot of meaning, these people, a lot more enjoyment out of their life than most white collar professionals, unfortunately.
It should be just as easy to get a loan to become an electrician, a plumber, or an auto mechanic as it is to get a loan for those are great careers. And some of the smartest people I've ever met work those careers and don't have formal education, and we need to bring those back and not become like the Zoom class and everyone else.
Dude, formal education is like brainwashing. That's how I see it. is because it's just you're going to follow my ways of doing things and my ways of learning, and guess what? It's not relevant, it's obsolete, and it's outdated. And that's why I always say, like, I'll hire someone that's got 6 months experience over someone's got a 4-year degree in marketing any day. Any day. It's
Yeah.
also, they demonstrate they make better decisions with their lives, in my opinion. That someone that went into the private sector, they have better value. Yeah, Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs.
I've heard that name.
Yeah. So he talks a lot about vocational and trying to show a lot
Mhm.
more respect to the people that are like those real good jobs and all that. And it's a shame because it's interesting. Every society, you can't do without it. Every society needs its people to work on the on the electricity and the local and keeping everything on. And they're all local. They're your neighbors and there's people. But for some reason, we diminish this work. My dad's blue collar, my stepfather's blue collar. They're doing vocational work, and I think it's fantastic. Yeah, I always said the reparations should go from universities to blue collar. We shouldn't we shouldn't be paying off people that went to universities that can't get a job. Maybe should be go to the government asking you everyone else to bail you out. I thought that was like the biggest chutzpah. I was like, how is that even a conversation? Whatever. America's got their own problems. We'll deal with our problems here. So let's talk about our problems here, David. So, all right. So you moved to Israel. When did you move to Israel?
In 2017.
And when did you meet your wife?
So I met her on the internet like a week or so before I came and started talking to her. And then we had our first date. Literally, as I got off the plane, like 6 hours later, we met and
amazing.
Worked out great.
That's amazing. Wait, were you guys connected through someone like a shidduch, or was it like a dating app, or what was it?
Yeah, just dating app.
A dating app? Amazing. Very cool.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so
that's the thing nowadays.
dude, it's weird because I was before that I've been married 11 years now. So I'm like, what? I was never introduced to that stuff, but I had some friends I went to college with that are still, unfortunately, failing at this thing called life and dating. And I was just like, yeah, I guess cool, but this is sad. In a way, I guess. But it was a little bit before me. So you came over and all right, so you met your wife and all that, but you moved here, but you didn't. When did you finish your conversion? Actually, I think that's more interesting, right?
Baltimore.
You finished it in Baltimore. When and what year? Yeah.
That was also 2017, earlier in 2017.
So as soon as you finished, then you're like, okay, I'm making Aliyah. I'm gonna move to Israel.
So the reason I decided to make Aliyah was what happened was I was under the impression I was going to graduate school at the University of Florida to study physical therapy, which I thought was going to be my life's work, was kind of teaching people how to treat pain through exercise instead of painkillers, which would have done a great thing to help with the national opioid crisis in America, which I was very passionate to help solve. But then even though I had been admitted and accepted, having informed them of a criminal record, at the last minute, they decided that I was ineligible to register for classes because of my criminal record. So like I'd closed my business, packed my stuff.
Wait,
was
why?
Ready to go.
Was this like a policy or a rule, or was this just some asshole that think that like to give people feel good about themselves by giving people a hard time?
So the way it was explained to me after I accepted their offer, they started asking me some weird questions. And eventually what they told me was I had to apply again. And what they said to me was that everyone who is accepted into a graduate program is automatically enrolled in the university at large, unless they have a criminal record. If you have a criminal record, then even though you're accepted in the graduate program, you also have to apply to be able to the university to be able to register for classes, something which wasn't on their website. It wasn't in the offer letter I received. And I was very upset about because I turned down an offer from another school that might not have had that policy. But they told me like, yeah, you have to do it. I consulted with some lawyers, and the lawyers basically told me like, look, you're released earlier for good behavior. It's a public university in America. You're enrolled in a public university in America. You've had no incidents. You're a straight A student, and you literally work for the police department.
Will you marry my daughter?
Yeah, like there's no way that they could say that you can't attend classes when you send them, letters from judges and police officers attesting to your character and the fact you changed. But they still did.
Unbelievable. Geez,
Yeah.
was that like, how does one respond when they get that news?
It was absolutely crushing. So I was, I, I got the news. It was like during the waiting period, they told me to take about a week to get an answer, but it ended up taking them about 3 months to answer me. And that was some of the psychologically most painful time of my life.
Sounds like now,
And
it's similar too, right? With your getting your Aliyah.
yes, yeah. And a big part of that was when you're in prison, you are suffering and it's terrible, but you know what you did wrong and you know when it's going to end. So you can at least say like, oh, I made these mistakes. I can see what I did wrong. If I don't want this to happen, I know not to do these again. And you have a release date. And during this time, like I was like looking back on like all the things I'd done over the previous year since my release, and it seemed like I'd done everything perfectly. Like, what more could you ask of an ex-felon than to be involved in the community, to be working closely with the police department to keep them safe, to be active in other community projects, to own a business, to be a straight A student in college? Like, what else
Not even of an
could I?
ex-felon, of any citizen. What more can you ask for?
Yeah, yeah. And to still be punished after doing all of that just kind of made me realize that you have this thing called a felony, and there is nothing you can ever do to get past it. It's always a reason to hold you back. Like I've like ruined my life in a very real sense forever in a way that I'll just never be able to get over.
Yeah, damn. So you're okay. So then you finish your. It's tragic. It's really tragic because everyone's like, how can we fix this? And how much of it is it's not legal, it's psychological and societal, it's cultural, right? So I guess that means we can fix it more than we think. There aren't like individuals. I think it's just more conversations like this, right? That's kind of what drives people for people to know that just because you see criminal record in my opinion, generally speaking, of course, a rehabilitated person is usually a better person than someone who has never had any trouble at all.
Definitely.
Kind of like tshuva. When you do tshuva, you have a closer relationship than if one relationship was never rocked and that you've completely repaired. Very similar to that, in my opinion. So you converted. So when you converted to Orthodox, so you were halachically Jewish in the beginning of 2017, right? You
Yeah.
were saying, and then you decided what? Then when did you decide while you were converting? Once I finish my conversion, I'm going to then move to Israel, or how and when did you decide? How
It
did you decide to get up and uproot your life altogether again?
it was during this process of waiting for an answer that I kind of, for the graduate program, that since I, closing my business, packing my bags, like if I wasn't going to graduate school, I could theoretically go anywhere, and that it must be Hashem's way of telling me, go to Israel. That's home.
There was everything right. It was actually you needed the fresh start. I mean, actually, it was logical almost.
Yeah.
As they say, the shenem makom, shenem mazal, right? You
Yeah.
change your place, you change your luck. So you're like, all right, but did you not apply for like Aliyah, food nefesh, but nefesh? Like you're like, you have the proof of. By the way, even when I made Aliyah, they gave me a headache to prove my Judaism and those born Jewish. I had to find documents that I didn't know how to search for them. I was like, how do I prove my grandmother from the Holocaust is Jewish? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So first I talked to my rabbi. The rabbi was like, great, but first you need to do a pilot trip because you got to be on the ground in Israel to make sure that you know what's right. So I scheduled a 2-month pilot trip to come study at a place called Pardes, and teal around the country, travel around, see what it's like. And that 2-month pilot trip is when I came. I met my wife. I loved the studying on the summer program, and then I got a scholarship and a fellowship to study in their year-long program. Plus, my future wife was like, "Oh, don't go back to America. Stay and study." So I stayed and studied. The relationship kept going. We got engaged, and so I didn't apply until I was done with my student visa after my year at yeshiva.
Wow. So you came for like a 2-month trial, and you're like, "This is cool. Let me just extend it. Why not?" Right?
Yeah.
And so you're studying
Yeah.
yeshiva. Okay, got it. Okay, that was the big piece of your story I couldn't understand from reading around. That was I feel like there's a big hole in in understanding the things. Okay, cool. So you've been living here since. You never moved
Yeah.
back to America.
No, I came on the pilot trip and
Did you like overstay
lived
your
here.
visa? Did you get like a 3-month visa, right? Probably.
So no, 'cause I got a 3-month visa, but then I got a student visa for the year in yeshiva.
Got it.
And then there's multiple times after that where I technically overstayed my visa due to government policies and conflicting information
What do
that
you
have
mean?
popped up along. So for example, when my student visa extended until May 31st, the last day of classes. And I
What
finished my
year
Aliyah
was 2018?
This is
2019?
2018, yes.
Mhm.
2018. And my application for Aliyah finished on May 9th. So there was like a period for them to answer. And during that time, I consulted with lawyers who basically said, like, your application's great. I've never seen someone who has as much proof of doing tshuva. Plus, all your crimes were before you were Jewish, which is work in your favor as well. And it's like, but the danger is you don't want to be here illegally overstaying your visa, so make sure you always have a visa. So before my student visa expired, because they hadn't answered, I went in and they told me like, "Oh, you don't need a visa to be in the country legally if you have a pending Aliyah application." I said, "That's great. Could I have that in writing?" They said, "Sure, no problem." Printed me out a document, put a nice official stamp on it, gave it to me. I glanced at it. It's all in Hebrew, so I don't bother reading it. And then a week and a half later, I went to.
I see all the unpacking.
Yeah, a week later, I went to Hungary to do a workshop for like breathing relaxation exercises. I come back, coming through passport control. They say, "Yeah, you overstayed your last visa. Why are you coming back?" And I say, "No, I have a pending Aliyah application." I hand him the letter. He reads it. Immediately, he's on the phone. "Please step to the back." I'm detained and interrogated for 4.5 hours. It's made abundantly clear to me that there is no such law that you can have a pending Aliyah application and be in the country legally without a visa. You always need a visa to be in the country. I overstayed my visa previously. If I'm ever there without a visa, then I would be detained and deported. Got through that. And then later on, 3, 4 months later, like 5 months later, I still haven't got an answer to my Aliyah application. I come in to renew my visa again, and they say, "We can't renew your visa." And I say, "Why not?" They're like, "Well, we don't want you to stay in the country for a day longer if you're denied." And I said, "But my visa's expiring. I need a visa to stay in the country legally." And they're like, "No, no, no, no. You have a pending Aliyah application. You don't need one." And I'm like, "I've already been detained over this. I know it's not true." And they basically tell me it's definitely true. Go look it up. And they say, "If it's true, can you find the law that says that?" And they told me it's not our job to find the law that says that and show you. It's your job to go find it. And then I overstayed my visa once again. Yeah. And then over this hunger strike, before I had my appointment on December 30th, 2001, and they told me, "Oh yeah, just come in to Misrapanim with our appointment and renew your visa." And then so since I didn't have an answer to my Aliyah application or a timeline, I went on the hunger strike. Then the last day of my visa is I'm outside Misha Panim anyway. I walk inside to renew it. They're like, oh, we need an appointment. You can't do this. So
Coronavirus. I hate that. Can't even go to you should be able to walk into my
yeah,
bank. They won't even let me walk in my bank.
yeah. So then I technically overstayed my visa for a few days, and then I was late for you this morning because I was in Misha Panim, finally getting it renewed, and I am now legally in the country once again.
I know it's hard for you to laugh because you're not done until you get it, but it's just pathetic. Let me ask you, wait, your wife, she's Israeli, right?
Yeah, so her family made Aliyah from the States when she was 5.
Okay, so she's an Israeli citizen. And so
Yes.
but if you, well, maybe because you overstayed your visa, but if you're married to an Israeli citizen, you can also move to get Israeli citizenship if you move to Israel,
So
even if you're not Jewish,
that
right?
so that is extremely complicated. So after I was initially denied Aliyah because they said my conversion was unacceptable, despite the fact that I used the conversion to get married through the rabbinate and they didn't explain what was wrong with it, they told me I could apply for status based on my relationship. And because I needed a visa and I had not had the ability to work and support my family, we applied for status in the country based on our marriage, and I was denied that.
Why?
And because we got married in Israel through
Ah,
the
you have to get married
rabbinate,
abroad. Oh.
and you could, and they only accept civil marriages to give you status in the country if you're married to a citizen, which means you cannot get married in Israel to an Israeli citizen and get status through that. But they did let me know it wasn't a problem because I could just make Aliyah. It was an easy process, and my, marriage certificate from the rabbinate was the best Jewish proof I could ever have, which of course conflicted what the other office told us. And then we managed to get a visa based on being in an unmarried relationship to an Israeli citizen,
I didn't know that was a
which
thing.
is
Okay.
which is not a great visa. Like you don't get health insurance.
Right.
So to upgrade that, since we couldn't get a response to our appeal, we went to America and had a civil marriage. We came back and tried to use that to register as married, which we couldn't do either. And the reason for that was since my wife was registered as married through our Israeli marriage, she couldn't be married. I couldn't be married to her because she was already married to me.
I'm out of questions.
Yeah.
That's just like pathetic. You hear all this,
Yeah.
you're like, I don't even know what to ask anymore. It's just
And that's what kind of kicked off the first media storm, which was a big
when
part
was
of
that? By the way, when did that was like what? Like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
this was 2020.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay.
And then that kicked off the process where they eventually acknowledged that my Orthodox conversion was acceptable for Aliyah. And then, but I couldn't get Aliyah yet because they needed to handle the criminal record. And they started me on a trial period, which they refused to state how long it would be or give me any information about it.
Do you think you're one? Okay. In addition to the insane incompetence of the Israeli government, surprise, surprise, would you say you're one of those weird cases that there's so many weird things that you kind of fall between the cracks? Or do you think this is beyond incompetence and this is just like I don't know. Do you feel like you just have such a strange situation with so many different variables, overstaying visas here and there, your criminal record before you were Jewish, you converted, and then that, and then you were married to your wife, who happened to be married to another man who happens to be you.
Yeah.
Do you think since like fell through the cracks, or do you think there's a lot, or like you're an exception, or do you find that there's a lot of, do you think there's many other people out there that are having similar troubles, such as that you're having?
Throughout this process, I've met a few people who didn't have the exact same situation, but had some sort of difficult situation and therefore were unable to make Aliyah for years because the Israeli government can't sometimes can't figure out basic things. For example, after the first article about me in the Jerusalem Post, a woman reached out to them who had been trying for 2 years to make Aliyah, but had been denied because she like couldn't get like her original marriage certificate from her first marriage because like the synagogue had burnt down and her husband had died, and so they wouldn't confirm her Jewish status even though they let her siblings make Aliyah. And like so like you have these things that pop up, and I think with my case specifically, there are I'm a member of a number of vulnerable groups, such as being a convert and having a criminal record, which makes it so that I'm not an easy case that someone necessarily wants to take responsibility for. One of the things that
Wow.
I'm and
That says something, right? No one wants to take responsibility.
yeah, I think
Right.
it's easy to look at my file without taking the time to meet me and just kind of blow through all of the letters of support and all the people who want to vouch for me and see the criminal record and think, as a bureaucrat, there's only a downside to signing this. Kind of if something were to happen, I'm be held responsible. Like, what's the upside for me or the country of signing off on this and letting him be a citizen? On the other hand, I think if you look at all those letters of support and all the things that I've done and me as a person, and you see the value that I can bring as a person, not only to the Jewish people, but to the state of Israel, it becomes obvious that I should be welcomed in and become a citizen. And just bureaucracy is not built to do that. It's more built to stop a catastrophe instead of seeing the promise and the potential.
Wow. Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. Which is very almost anti-Jewish in a way, or counters Jewish values. I have a friend from Philly. He lives here with me in Pardes, and he's like, "I'm not making Aliyah. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to deal with all the headache you're dealing with." He's no problem proving it. His father's even a rabbi, and and now that he goes, I don't want to send them to the shitty schools. I'll just homeschool, not pay taxes, and not make Aliyah, and I'm living in Eretz Israel. That's why I'm here. And he'll say I'm a Zionist, but I hate the government, but I don't like government. So, do you think maybe you'll look back and you'll be relieved, and then when you start doing, you said how much you hated doing taxes when back in the States. You think you're gonna, and then you start paying taxes. You think you're gonna regret all this?
I mean, I definitely don't think I'll regret a moment of this.
Uh-huh.
And for me, it is like the way I've been welcomed in and accepted by the Jewish people is nothing short of a miracle in of itself. Like the amount of like love and support that I'm shown every time I have to go through one of these ordeals makes it very clear to me that like Am Yisrael sees me as a Jewish. They see me as having done Shuvah, and they think that they're fighting for me to stay here as hard as they can, just like I'm fighting. And the thing about hardship and struggle is that it's terrible to go through and you suffer and it's hard. But just like that name, Israel, struggling with God, there is a lot of growth that you can take from having to fight for something. And I think that I'm mature enough to be learning the lessons along the path to where I'll come out the other end a much better and stronger person, able to contribute more to making the world a better place.
Amazing. Beautiful. I want to end it up. I have one question I want to ask the whole time. Okay. So you're in what drives a man to hunger strike is usually when he feels like he's run out of options, right? Is because why would you do something that's hard, so hard on yourself? One, what's it like to go, how long was it? 8 days? No food?
Yeah, 8.5 days. 8.5. With the exception of I did do the halachic minimum
Oh,
of,
Shabbat.
3 kazites of bread for the meals on Shabbat and like a sip
Uh-huh.
of wine, which
Hmm.
was actually worse than not eating.
Right, right. No, because it makes you hungrier, right? It's almost it's
Yeah, and I was much hungrier after that, but I talked to my rabbi. It's like, yeah, there's no way around this. Kind of have to do it. It was like,
mhm.
fine, you win,
Got it.
rabbi.
Yeah, right. Got it. Okay, right. And every other meal, can I get no. If I'm hungry, just like when I'm eating all day. Only shawarma.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Yeah.
what's it like to take on a hunger strike? To like, it seems very difficult to have oneself when they've access to food to refuse food for such an extended period of time. What was the? I would like to hear more about that.
It is a scary decision on a number of fronts. Because one, so I've done some like fasting before, like 36 hours, like twice a week type thing,
Oh
like
wow.
for like health and fitness reasons. But when you declare a hunger strike, you don't know how long it's going to last.
Mm.
And you never know how much willpower you have and how much you believe in your cause until you're tested.
Wow. So
Like,
would you say you're tested more than the people you're striking against, right?
I mean, to me, the protest of a hunger strike is really a statement to the world that you're saying, I believe that I am so right and being so mistreated that I am willing to forego food and risk my own health and possible death to make a statement that I am correct.
And the media behind that, do you think that was a big driving force to get you your actual visa and the promise for by next year? Do you think how much of an how would you say how has that affected the process?
I mean, I think that it had to have been just based on the fact that throughout this process, one of the reasons why it has gone on for such a long period of time is every time I put in a request, it was either ignored or not responded to for like 9 months, regardless of what the law says about what timeline I should expect a response. And this time I got a response in under 2 weeks.
I
And the
wonder
response,
why.
and one of the things I like to say about this response is that as someone with a criminal record, I don't believe that we just need to have this open-ended policy where all people with criminal records like don't need any extra investigation or vetting. I think that's a fair statement. I think that a very reasonable way to have handled a case like mine, even considering the risk and all the positive, is if I put in my application, they said, look, you're Jewish, you have a criminal record, you're going to have a trial period for this amount of time, and on this date, if you don't cause any trouble, you'll receive Ole status and become a citizen. If it was like 1 year, 2 year, three
Right, like a
years,
rehab
that would
kind
have
of thing, like
yeah,
probation, I meant.
that would yeah, that would have been a completely fair and reasonable way for Israel to let me in and vet me more closely to make sure they're not handing citizenship to a dangerous criminal. But the way they chose to handle it instead, were first they said, oh, it's the conversion. They gave me this runaround. They refused to put any timelines. They ignored the dates. It is completely unacceptable. And I'm a human being and deserve better treatment than that.
Yeah, well, God willing, governments would get better at seeing human beings and not just seeing you as another random not even a person, a piece of paper. I'd say, right? Okay, so what I really wanted to know, when someone does a hunger strike when they're in prison, when they choose to eat again, they eat prison food. But when a free man goes on a hunger strike and he gets to eat again, I would like to know what did you eat?
Okay, so an unfortunate thing about the location that I was hunger striking
It was like that shitty falafel
was
place down the block.
there was a restaurant behind me two
my God.
restaurants. I was like a triangle. So there's a restaurant behind me, and then two restaurants I could visually see all day long. There was Kadosh, there was Sushi Mamilla, there was Harvey's, and a Mexicani that I'm just
Okay, I know
staring
exactly
at
where you are. Yeah.
all day long. So I
Uh-huh.
finally broke it. First, I went to Kadosh and had the risotto. And then I had some water and went to Harvey's and got a burger.
There you go. All right. Sweet. Amazing. Beautiful. Would you, if you
And
had,
yeah.
if you could have eaten anything in hindsight, what would it have been? Obviously, convenience would have been, is the priority here.
Yeah.
But if you could snap your fingers and have eaten anything, what would it be at that moment?
I think I would have done pizza first.
Pizza. Okay.
Pizza,
Good.
yeah, pizza's my favorite food, yeah. And then also one of the things though that made it easier was I wasn't actually there all day. So I was there 24/7, night and day, with the exception of I went to the kotel and davened every davening there during the entire time I was striking. And so I have this another beautiful, amazing experience where for 7 days, 21 straight davenings, I did all of them at the kotel while fasting and put 21 notes inside the wall. And it was just this wonderful spiritual experience that is also valuable. So I gotta look on the bright side. I think that helped me deal with the hunger strike much more easily.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can imagine you. You're a blessed man. I got to say that, and happy that your prayers were answered. So your situation now is they give you a visa, and they promise you citizenship in like a year. So
Yes,
why?
yeah.
Why can't it be you're good? We're processing your paperwork will be done in 6 weeks, which is, in my opinion, also absurd. But what's going on? Why a year? Why is this dragging out?
Yeah. I honestly don't. I mean, I know that we have it in writing.
But you've had
And
other things in writing by bureaucrats. Is this writing different because there's the media behind it?
no,
And so
actually, one of the problems during this process is very few of these things were in writing, or they're in writing. Like, so the first initial visa thing, the problem was the letter they gave me didn't say I was in the country legally. It just said I had a pending Aliyah file, like, period. Like, in general, the things that we've gotten from them in writing have been stuck to, but we just have a huge problem with them giving us anything in writing.
So why January 1st?
I mean, it's the new year. I honestly don't know. I mean, I would much prefer it's right now when this nightmare is completely over, but I can be reasonable and like having a date in writing. Like I said, like that's
Right.
something like this should have happened on, day one of the saga, their first response. And
Right.
at least now we're getting reasonable responses. And I have done a pretty good job over the last, 11, 12 years of avoiding criminal activity. And I don't think I'll have a problem doing it for another year or for the rest of my life.
For those bureaucrats listening, he's done a better job than me at avoiding criminal activity. Amazing. And do you think what are the probability you think that they will stick to their word, you'll get citizenship by January 1st?
I think it's pretty high. I think now that I have it in writing and all this media coverage that I've shown
I think the media
lengths,
is more important, probably.
Yeah. And I've shown the lengths that I'm willing to go for this. I don't think that we'll have a problem. But if there is, I am ready to cause another problem because I'm a Jew. I love Israel. This is, yeah,
I'm ready to
my
cause the
home.
ruckus.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sad that they're making me fight so hard for my citizenship, but I'm willing to fight for the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people follow you?
Easiest place to follow me is on Twitter at Real D Ben Moshe.
Awesome. Fantastic.
You can also connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, send me an email, david@davidbenmoshe.org.
Awesome.
Pretty accessible.
We'll leave all of this stuff in the comment section, in the description. David, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining the Jewish people.
Thank you for having me.
And continue to shine the light on the terrible, obnoxious things that the bureaucrats are doing to you. We're all suffering from them, not nearly as much as you are, but hopefully you can alleviate a lot of other people's suffering. You represent a lot more of us than you think in many more ways than you can imagine. So I'm blessed to have this conversation with you. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. Let me know when you're up in Pardes, Hana, or I'm down in Beersheba. I'll hit you up.
Oh, will do.
Take care. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.